That was an excerpt of John Philip Sousa's The Cajuns Go Rolling On. Hi, I'm Julia Cavalieros, and before we get started, I'm going to give you a brief overview of what to expect from this video. In order to understand why propaganda was needed, I'm going to set the scene with some background information. Then, followed by problems propaganda faced and the strategies they used to overcome them. Now you might be wondering, who is this they you speak of? The Committee of Public Information is who? And head of this committee was George Creel, and I'll introduce his role and the legacy he left behind in a little bit. Background. Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand was shot down by a Serbian patriot, and the greatest war the world had ever seen began over in Europe. Between unrestricted submarine warfare, the Zimmermann telegram, and U.S. business interest, President Woodrow Wilson signed the Proclamation of War on April 2, 1917. But the government needed soldiers, fast. They didn't have a moment to wait while Americans made up their minds. They needed the extra push. Nations needed a way of communicating that war was just. However, most people did not own radios back then. Therefore, Wilson designed the Committee of Public Information, or CPI. It was an easier and more affordable way for the government to convey their messages to the American people. But before we get into the mission of CPI, it is important to understand what propaganda is and how it was used. The campaign was designed to reach anyone who could understand a picture. Pictures were the easiest and cheapest way to reproduce and could be printed in a variety of languages. Propaganda posters were used for recruiting men to join the army, recruiting women to work at the factories and in the Women's Land Army, keep morale high, and to encourage people to buy war bonds.
America's fourth war loan is rolling from Big Broadway to the smallest Main Street. $14 billion is the goal for this drive, so over the top again, America. Let's keep it rolling. Let's match our dollars against the valor of boys like these at California's Mare Island Naval Hospital. They wear artificial limbs to replace arms and legs they left at Guadalcanal or Bougainville or Tarawa. They're back on their feet, smiling now, and they want you to buy more war bonds. How about it, folks? What do you say, America?
Subscribing to the bonds became a symbol of patriotic duty in the United States. But overall, it inspired Americans to pick up a flag and support their country. A famous example of this is James Montgomery Flagg's I Want You poster. Problems with propaganda and strategies used to overcome them. A major problem that propagandists had to deal with was the fact that a large percent of Americans were foreign-born, and around a fourth of them were from German descent. All of these groups were traditionally hostile to countries like Britain and Russia, or emotionally linked to Germany. Because of this roadblock, instead of telling people to go fight your brothers and uncles over in Germany, fight the Huns became an underground term. They also stressed the importance of protecting the children and wives from these Huns. Some positives about CPI strategies were that they encouraged people that they were a part of the effort to win the war. Some negatives were that they were designed to play into public fear, and that the war might be lost if you don't do your part. Posters were meant to make men feel cowardly and feeble, and women were encouraged to pressure their spouses into joining the war effort. Fear was used as a way to motivate men to join or assist in the war effort. Atrocity propaganda is a form of psychological warfare. It is the deliberate spreading of fabricated or exaggerated crimes committed by the enemy. Posters showed barbarous crimes that the Germans were said to be committing in France and Belgium, and unless the Germans were stopped, they would come commit the same horrors against your own family. This This once a Hun, always a Hun viewpoint made you fear an enemy or created a fear that you didn't know you had. Therefore, this form of propaganda turned out to be one of the most effective political strategies ever used. George Creel on the Committee of Public Information. CPI was founded by President Wilson, who then appointed 3 cabinet members and George Creel as chairman. The 4 of them met one time. Creel listened to their ideas and never spoke to them again. CPI was George Creel. Previously a muckraking journalist and the creator of Newsbook, George Creel was the perfect fit for the job. Creel had always been a strong supporter of Wilson even before he was president. He got the job as chairman after sending Wilson a letter urging voluntary agreements with the press to control information rather than institute formal censorship. No lies would be allowed about the enemy that would negatively impact the public's opinion about the war. George Creel utilized every form of communication, whether that was through radio, newspapers, posters, etc. He designed propaganda films such as The Pershing's Crusaders, America's Answers, and Under Four Flags. He also recognized the need for Allied cause, and brought in war heroes and speakers from France and Great Britain. He published daily newspapers and specially written articles went out to schools. Creel made his product available to everyone. Immigrant communities could find Creel's papers in their own language. But the highlight of CPI was Creel's 4 Minutemen. They would show up before or after a film and give their speech in place of a trailer. They performed in movie theaters, lodges, union halls, churches, Sunday schools, and the list goes on. Their topics of speech were about the universal service by selective draft, the Red Cross, food conservation in victory gardens, and selling Liberty bonds. Using his own statistics, Creel had over 750,000 men, who gave over 7.5 million speeches to over 314 million people. That means every American heard about 3 speeches on average. The Draft. On June 5, 1917, 10 million men got in line as every American between the ages of 21 to 30 registered for the first U.S. draft since the Civil War. Whites and blacks were on equal terms, but were often placed in different units. Creel's next challenge was in 1918 when the government decreed a second draft, registering every male from 18 to 45 years of age. Creel went all out. He took his 4 Minutemen to new heights, created a new advertising division that shipped full-page ads to over 18,000 newspapers, and sent out 20 million copies of the Selective Service Register. Once again, a surplus of men registered without much protest. The end of CPI. The enormous propaganda machine Creel created only cost taxpayers just under $5 million. But Creel also failed to mention that he had unlimited access to a $50 million President's Fund. After the war was over, the Congress canceled CPI. The public in Congress grew more outraged after being duped. Creel spent his last few months fighting rumors that his committee was guilty of terrible financial mismanagement, if not outright fraud. We wouldn't see another propaganda power until World War II. However, President Franklin Roosevelt designed his CPI policies so they wouldn't duplicate the ending failures of George Creel's. Overall, the legacy that George Creel left is rather impressive. CPI was able to succeed in its goals of unifying and protecting America and ultimately changing the way the war was won.
When Yankee Doodle comes to town upon his little pony, be there staunch and true. It's time for every boy to be a soldier, to put his strength and courage to the test. It's time to place a musket on his shoulder and wrap the stars and stripes around his breast.